Parents stole my med school fund for my brother's art. Then the dean dropped a bombshell. The moment I opened my banking app, I knew something was wrong. The screen blinked, refreshed twice, then froze on a single number 0. I blinked again, thinking maybe the signal dropped or the app glitched. But no matter how many times I swiped, refreshed, or relogged, the result stayed the same. The joint savings account I'd built with my parents since I was 13, the account I'd deposited every summer job paycheck, every tutoring gig, every research assistant stipend into, was empty, gone. My name is Jennifer Lopez. I'm 28. And after years of grit, sacrifice, and unglamorous work in public hospitals across Chicago, I had finally been accepted into Oak Ridge Medical School's advanced program in trauma surgery. My acceptance letter was still taped to the fridge in my tiny apartment, right next to the post-it that said, "You're doing this for 13-year-old you." The apartment wasn't much, but it was mine, and everything inside it had been earned the long way. For the first time in years, I'd let myself exhale, until now. My first call wasn't to the bank. It was to my mother. She answered on the third ring, breathless, cheerful, as if she'd been rehearsing. "Jenny, honey, we were just about to call you. I didn't bother with pleasantries. The account is empty," I said, my voice too calm to be safe. "Where's my med school fund?" There was a pause, 2 seconds too long. Then came the clink of plates, a forced laugh, and a casual, "Why don't you come by tonight? Your brother has some exciting news." I didn't need to hear it to know. I already felt the ground shifting under my feet. When I pulled up to their house in Oak Grove, the same colonial-style house I helped repaint every summer growing up, I saw the fancy china on the table through the window. I hadn't seen that china since Grandma's 80th. My brother, Daniel, was lounging on the sofa, scrolling on his phone like nothing in the world had ever touched him. "Hey, sis," he said, not looking up. "Did Mom tell you?" Tell me what I asked, though every cell in my body already knew. My father came out of the study, that rare, prideful smile stretching across his face. Perfect timing. "Jennifer, we're celebrating." "The account," I said flatly. "What happened to my medical school fund?" My mother breezed into the room, holding a tray of casseroles, like this was Thanksgiving and not a betrayal. "Sit down first. Honey, we have wonderful news. Daniel's been accepted into the Paris Institute of Avant-Garde Visuals. Only a few students get in a year, and the tuition I asked." My father cleared his throat. "That's what we wanted to discuss. It's a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity." "You used my money," I said, staring at them. "Our money," my mother corrected gently. "It was a joint account. Remember, and this is a family decision, my work is transformative." Daniel chimed in, finally meeting my eyes. "My first piece is going to explore urban decay through melted mannequin limbs and reflective foil. It's about capitalism." I couldn't even speak. My dream had always been medicine, not status, not ego, just the quiet, serious calling to mend what breaks. I'd earned every step early admission to community college, top of my class at state school, volunteer hours, sleepless nights, side jobs, and suddenly, it was all rerouted into my brother's dream. A dream so fragile it required stealing from mine to stand. "I start orientation in 5 weeks," I said, but even I heard how far away my voice sounded. "You can defer," my mother said gently, reaching for my hand. I pulled away. "Take time to reflect, to really think if trauma surgery is your calling. It's such a heavy path. Daniel's opportunity is time-sensitive. Art's about momentum. Medicine will always be there. My chair scraped against the hardwood as I stood. 8 years. I said, I worked and saved for 8 years. You promised to match it. We will, my father said, eyes flicking to his wine glass. Just not right now. Daniel rolled his eyes. Don't be dramatic. Jen, it's just money. No, I said, it's everything. Everything I worked for. Everything you said you believed in. No one spoke. I watched them. My mother. All soft edges and false kindness. My father. Retreating into technicalities. Daniel. The golden boy with no scars and no stakes. And then I smiled. Not the kind of smile they were used to, used. Not the peacekeeping daughter. The helper. The invisible achiever. Something had cracked open in me. Not loud, just final. You're right. I said quietly, it's just money. They exhaled, mistaking surrender for silence, to Daniel. My father toasted, raising his glass. Paris won't know what hit it. I raised mine too. But my toast wasn't for Daniel. It was a promise, a contract with myself as I left. My mother called after me. You'll understand one day, Jennifer, this is what's best for the family. They had no idea what they had just set in motion. No idea at all. I didn't go home that night. I drove around the lake twice before parking in front of a 24-hour diner near the hospital and sat there for what felt like hours, watching strangers eat pancakes beneath buzzing fluorescent lights. My phone buzzed with a dozen messages from my mother, each more polished than the last. Some pretending nothing had happened, some lightly accusing me of being ungrateful. One ending with a photo of Daniel's art supplies arranged like a shrine. I didn't respond to any of them. Instead, I opened my laptop, reopened the scholarship portal I'd bookmarked months ago, but never had the courage to complete, and started filling in blanks. The Oak Ridge Women in Medicine grant was small, but the Nero Hargrove Fellowship was something else entirely, a full ride. Rare, prestigious, cutthroat. Only one student received it each year, and it required not just transcripts, but a personal essay, a letter from a department chair, and proof of financial hardship. At 2 a.m, I typed the line, my med school fund was reassigned without my consent, then deleted it, then retyped it softer, then deleted it again. I stared at the screen until the cursor blinked like a heartbeat I didn't trust. The next day, I walked into the trauma clinic wearing the same scrubs from the shift before, eyes sunken, mind elsewhere. Dr. Patel, who'd mentored me since I was a sophomore, noticed instantly, you look like you slept in your car, she said without judgment. I just nodded. She didn't ask questions, just handed me a clipboard that night after stitching up a cyclist's leg. I asked her if she would consider writing a recommendation letter. She paused only for a moment. For what I told her. She didn't blink. I'll have it for you by Thursday. Outside the break room. I ran into Ava Kim, another med student who had once tried to outscore me in every rotation. We weren't friends. Exactly. But there was a kind of unspoken respect. She noticed the envelope sticking out of my pocket. Scholarship hunting. I didn't answer. She smiled faintly, a smile that said she had guessed more than I'd told. If anyone deserves it, it's not your brother. Daniel, meanwhile, had gone viral. My friend Maya sent me a link to one of his Instagram reels, a mannequin sitting in an old wheelchair, draped in surgical gowns, surrounded by decaying fruit and melting candles. The caption read, "Obsession with healing is just a delayed fear of rot." He was already being called a visionary. There were articles, interviews, even an invitation to present at a gallery in Murray, Maya, a law school student who'd grown up with both of us, sent one final message: you need to stop letting them write your story. On Friday, I mailed the scholarship packet. No dramatic music, no teary eyes, just me, a mailbox, and a deep breath I didn't realize I'd been holding for weeks. On the way home, I passed by my parents' house and saw balloons on the porch. Through the window, I spotted Daniel lifting a wine glass. Clara and Hector sat beside him, glowing. They hadn't called me once that week, not to ask if I was okay, not to say they hoped I'd find a way, not even to lie and say they were sorry. Just silence and celebration. At the apartment, I sat with Maya on the kitchen floor, eating microwave dumplings and reading over my essay one last time. She looked at me and said, "Even if you don't win it, you already beat them. You didn't fold." I didn't answer. I was still trying to believe that not folding was enough. Later that night, a text from my mother lit up my phone. Daniel's installation has been selected for international review. We're so proud. Thought you'd want to know. No question, no care. Just a reminder that their pride had moved elsewhere. I muted the thread. 2 days later, I got a call from the university. Dean Hargrove wanted to speak with me in person about my application. I sat across from his desk while he flipped through my essay, his glasses low on his nose. "This is honest," he said finally, "and very difficult to read." I waited for the rejection. Instead, he looked up. "We don't usually have applicants this late in the season, but your performance, your reputation, your essay, they all speak for themselves." He pushed a signed document toward me. "You're the top candidate, pending board approval. The scholarship is yours." I nodded, too stunned to speak. "Just one thing," he added. "You haven't told your family." "No," I said. "I'd like to keep it that way." "For now, fair enough," he replied. Sometimes the quietest victories make the loudest echoes. Outside his office, I stopped by the bulletin board and stared at the schedule for the fall semester. My name was already on it. I hadn't told a soul, not even Maya, not yet. I wanted it to be real first, fully mine, no interference, no apologies, no rerouting of credit. That night, Daniel posted a new reel titled "Consumption Culture Family as Currency." I didn't even click play. I just smiled and opened a blank document. The title read, "Application for Guest Speaker Nomination, Annual Oak Ridge Gala." If I was going to speak, I was going to make it count. The first time I saw what Daniel had made in Paris, I felt something in my stomach twist, like a muscle catching itself before breaking. It was Maya who showed me the photo, not out of malice but concern. The post had gone semi-viral on a niche art forum and was making its way into student group chats. The image showed a surgical dummy dressed in scrubs, surrounded by melting candles and dripping paint. The words, "Obedience," is a wound etched into its chest with fake blood. It was titled, "The Sister." No one asked who it was meant to be. Everyone already knew. The caption beneath it read, "To all those who heal others while rotting inside themselves." I didn't comment, didn't react, didn't share it. I just stared at the screen until my vision blurred. That night, I went back to the trauma wing and worked an extra shift without telling anyone. The smell of antiseptic, the weight of gloves, the quiet urgency of bleeding patients reminded me why I was there. This was my work. This was real. A week later, Oak Ridge's dean's office called again, My scholarship had been approved. I would be starting full enrollment in the fall. All expenses covered. They asked if I wanted my name announced at the semester's donor gala, which was now 3 weeks away. I hesitated before answering. The gala wasn't just a formality. It was where they introduced rising students to key funders, alumni, and community leaders. In a whisper, I said yes. After all the silence, it was time to stop hiding. Daniel's work, meanwhile, was climbing. A European gallery in Berlin had offered to host his installation, and my parents were flying out to see it. Clara sent me a group text with a link to the show's feature article in an art magazine. She wrote, "Can you believe it? Your brother's a star. He says his next piece is going to challenge cultural guilt and family shame. Sounds deep." Right, I didn't respond. Maya texted me privately. "They really don't see it." "Do they?" I replied. "They see exactly what they want to." The week before the gala, Dean Hargrove called me in again. "We've reviewed your nomination," he said, sliding a paper across the table. "And the board has unanimously agreed. We want you as keynote speaker." I paused, unsure whether to feel proud or unsettled. "I'm honored," I said, and I meant it. "But may I ask who else is attending?" He looked at his notes. "Several board members, donors, alumni, and one of your relatives, your cousin Ramon Lopez, is hosting a sponsor table. He listed your parents and brother as guests." I tried not to blink. "They don't know I'll be speaking." "Do they?" "No," he replied, watching me closely. "Is that a problem?" "Not for me," I said, "but it might be for them." Later that night, Maya and I sat on my balcony, drinking tea, listening to the faint hum of city traffic. I told her everything, the speech, the setup, the guest list. She didn't laugh or gloat. She just said, "Make sure when you speak, you don't let it come from revenge, let it come from truth. That's harder to ignore." I nodded, knowing she was right. I wasn't trying to humiliate them. I just wanted them to hear what they'd chosen not to. A few days later, Daniel messaged me directly for the first time in weeks. "Hey," it read, "heard about the gala. You going?" I stared at the message for a while. "Yes." I typed back. "You?" "Yeah," he replied. "I'm bringing something special. Gonna debut it during the toast." I didn't reply. Whatever stunt he was planning, it wasn't going to change what I had to say. That weekend, I finalized my speech. It didn't contain their names, just a story, my story, about what it meant to build something inch by inch, only to watch it be taken and repurposed without consent, about what it meant to be called dramatic for wanting fairness, about working late shifts while someone else's dreams were paid for with your future. I didn't write it to shame them. I wrote it so I wouldn't forget, so no one would. 2 nights before the gala, Maya called me. Her voice was sharp, direct. "You need to check the blogs," she said. "Something just broke." I opened the link she sent and felt my chest go still. A whistleblower account had surfaced from a gallery intern. They claimed Daniel's show was funded using stolen education money. The post didn't mention my name, but it didn't have to. The internet connected dots fast, within hours. Privileged parasite and art school thief were trending under his name. One commenter wrote, "If this is art, where's his sister's refund?" Another simply said, "Another rich boy performing trauma he never lived." My phone rang again. This time, it was my mother. I didn't answer. Her voicemail said, "Your brother's in trouble. Jennifer, the gallery's considering canceling. Can you please make a statement? Just tell them it was a misunderstanding." I let it play out without reacting. No one had spoken up for me. Not when they took the money. Not when Daniel paraded my identity like a costume. Not once. Now. They wanted me to clean up the mess. Instead, I opened my email, attached the final draft of my speech, and sent it to Dean Hargrove. The subject line simply read, "Keynote confirmed." I didn't need to prove anything. The truth was already unraveling. All I had to do now was wait for the room to go quiet. 2 days before the gala, I found myself back at the hospital library, surrounded by open textbooks and faded lecture notes, pretending to review thoracic trauma protocols while my thoughts swirled in every direction but clinical. I wasn't nervous about the speech. I knew my story. I'd lived every line of it. What unsettled me was the silence, for the first time in months. No new messages from my parents. No cryptic posts from Daniel. No last-minute phone calls asking me to reconsider. Just stillness, which I didn't trust. Maya called it the calm before the storm. I called it proof that they were planning something. The next morning, I met with the gala coordinator, a sharp woman named Elise, who walked me through the layout of the venue and pointed out the podium, the lighting rig, and the seat assignments. Your family will be seated at table 1, with your cousin Ramon, front row, directly facing the stage, she said, not realizing what a statement that would become. I nodded, already picturing their expressions. And your brother will be delivering a short visual piece during the donor toast, she added, something performance-based. Of course he would. I asked if I could rehearse with the mic and lighting. Elise stepped aside. Maya stood at the back of the room, filming quietly. I walked slowly to the podium, heels clicking on marble, heart steady. The lights hit my face, and for a second, I imagined it wasn't me standing there, but the 13-year-old version who had first dreamed of becoming a trauma surgeon, clutching an anatomy book in one hand and a stack of grocery receipts in the other. I began, not loud, not soft, just clear. 8 years ago, I started saving for medical school, not because I thought I'd be handed a path, but because I knew I wouldn't. Maya stopped recording and gave a quiet nod. You're ready, she said. You just need to keep your voice from shaking when you look them in the eye. That evening, as I walked home, I passed a coffee shop and spotted Ava Kim through the window. She was seated with 2 classmates, holding a flyer for the gala. Our eyes met briefly. She gave me the smallest nod. I took it as a truce. She didn't have to like me, but she respected me now. I stepped into my apartment and saw the mail on the floor. Among the envelopes was a hand-addressed letter. Inside was an invitation to a mentorship breakfast being hosted by the university the morning after the gala. A handwritten note from Dean Hargrove said, "We think your voice belongs here." It felt like something stable, something unshakable. At midnight, my phone rang. Daniel. I let it go to voicemail. His voice came through strained, not angry, just tired. Look, I know we're not great at talking, but tomorrow I'm doing something bold. It's performance art, but it's about family, about being misunderstood. And I hope you get it. I hope you don't take it personally. The irony didn't escape me. He had taken everything personally for years, painted my ambition as arrogance, my boundaries as betrayal. Now he wanted forgiveness wrapped in performance. I saved the message but didn't respond. On the morning of the gala, I woke up early. I ironed the black silk dress I had chosen weeks ago, not flashy, not demure, just quietly powerful. Maya arrived with coffee and mascara, joking that we were staging a heist. We're not stealing anything, I said, sipping the coffee. We're just returning the story to its rightful owner. The car ride was quiet. At the venue, the ballroom gleamed with crystal glassware, polished floors, and golden lighting. My name was already printed on the event booklet. Jennifer Lopez, keynote speaker, Nero Hargrove Fellow. No mention of Daniel, no footnote about family ties. Maya took her seat near the aisle, phone ready. I waited behind the curtains with Elise, breathing slow, steady, through the slats. I could see Clara and Hector settling into their seats. Ramon stood chatting with donors. Daniel, dressed in all black, sat next to a rolling cart draped with velvet, his special piece. No doubt. He kept glancing toward the stage, if he was nervous. He didn't show it, but he wasn't smiling either. The dean took the stage first, offering warm thanks to donors, faculty, and students. Tonight, we honor perseverance, he said, and the remarkable journey of one of our brightest. I heard my name before I saw the faces. My mother's wine glass trembled slightly. My father leaned forward. Daniel froze. I stepped out slowly, my footsteps the only sound I could hear. The spotlight met my skin, but I didn't blink. I reached the podium, placed my notes, and looked directly at them. I didn't flinch. 8 months ago, I was told I should take a break, that Madison would always be there, but some opportunities were fleeting, that my dream could wait for someone else's to unfold. I was asked to be understanding, to be patient, to be quiet, and for a while, I was. Until I realized that silence is a permission I never meant to give. The moment I began speaking, I could feel the shift in the room. It wasn't loud. It wasn't gasps or whispers. It was the quiet kind of stillness that happens when people realize they're not hearing a speech. They're hearing a reckoning. I spoke slowly, clearly, never raising my voice but letting each word land with precision. I didn't need to name anyone. The story carried enough weight without names. I told them about the summer jobs, the unpaid internships, the late-night shifts at public clinics while still studying. I told them about the joint savings account my parents had promised to match, and how every dollar I had tucked away was a step closer to the operating room I had dreamed about since middle school. Then I told them that 6 months before enrollment, that account vanished, not to fraud, not to accident, but to support someone else's opportunity, under the banner of family. I paused there, long enough for people to glance toward table 1. Daniel had stopped blinking. My mother's jaw was tight, her hands still, resting flat against her dress. My father stared at the edge of the table as if it would swallow him whole. I continued, describing how I'd considered quitting, how I almost convinced myself they were right, that maybe I wasn't built for this, that maybe medicine was something I had clung to for the wrong reasons. But then I explained what silence had taught me, that when people take something from you, they don't expect you to keep building. They expect you to disappear quietly, to make room for someone else's louder dream. But I didn't. I told them how I filed for scholarships without help, worked extra shifts without complaint, and enrolled on time without fanfare. I didn't do it to prove anything to them. I did it because I knew who I was before they forgot. My voice never cracked. I looked up only once, right as I said, sometimes the people who should have protected your dream the most become the very reason you learn how to protect it yourself. Maya was nodding from the aisle, camera steady, eyes sharp. A few rows back, a man I didn't know lowered his glass and stared at me like he just realized his own daughter might be sitting through something similar in silence. Then I said something I hadn't planned. It came out of me like breath after being held too long. I said, I used to think I needed them to see me, but what I needed was to see myself, clearly, without their shadow in the way. A few people clapped before the speech even ended. I wrapped it with gratitude for the donors who believed in unseen students, for mentors who wrote letters without needing explanations, and for the quiet work that builds something lasting. I thanked the institution for giving me a voice I wasn't sure I still had, and I stepped down with a calm I hadn't felt in years. The applause started light, but it grew fast, full, and for the first time, I didn't shrink away from it. I didn't feel like I was standing in someone else's spotlight. Back at my table, Maya reached for my hand and said, "That was surgical." I smiled without answering, across the ballroom. Daniel sat frozen, his velvet-covered cart still untouched, the dramatic unveiling he had planned now irrelevant. Clara leaned over to him, whispering something that made his shoulders stiffen. Hector stood slowly and followed a waiter toward the hallway, as if hoping to exit without drawing attention. They couldn't. Their silence was no longer armor, it was evidence. The dean approached me moments later, glass in hand. "That," he said, "wasn't just a keynote, that was a shift." I nodded, thanking him. "Your brother may still get his moment," he added softly, "but this one belonged to you, and it was earned." Maya and I walked out a little later than most. I saw Daniel still sitting at the table, alone now, his installation half unwrapped and entirely forgotten. He didn't look up as I passed. He didn't need to. He had heard everything, and more importantly, so had everyone else. Outside, the air was cool. I pulled my coat tighter, feeling lighter than I had in months, not because I had won, but because I had stopped waiting for them to explain why they took what was never theirs to begin with. Some truths don't need confrontation. They just need light. And that night, I had given them all of it. The morning after the gala, my phone was flooded with messages. Some were from classmates who had never spoken to me before, but now called my story powerful and long overdue. Others were from faculty, alumni, even a reporter from a local newspaper who wanted to profile me for their series on first-generation professionals. But none of those messages mattered as much as the one I didn't answer. It was from Daniel, just 3 words, no punctuation. "Well played, Jennifer." I read it once, deleted it without responding, and moved on. I didn't need his approval, and I didn't care for his tone. The gala wasn't a game, and my speech wasn't revenge. It was survival finally spoken out loud. Later that afternoon, I received an invitation to lunch from Dean Hargrove. We met at a quiet cafe near campus, and he handed me a folder. Inside was a proposal for a new mentorship program aimed at helping underrepresented students navigate the financial, emotional, and institutional barriers of med school. At the top, it read, "Program Advisor, Jennifer Lopez." He explained that after last night's speech, several benefactors had approached him, wanting to fund something meaningful, something with impact. I asked him why he thought I was the right person to lead it. He just looked at me and said, "Because you know what the inside of a closed door looks like and how to get it open." I told him I'd think about it, but part of me already knew the answer. Walking back through campus, I passed a bulletin board where someone had pinned up a printout of the gala photo. I stood in the spotlight, shoulders back, eyes calm. The caption beneath it read, "She didn't burn bridges. She lit the path." I didn't know who had posted it, but it stayed with me the rest of the day, back at the hospital. I rejoined my rotation in trauma intake. It felt grounding to be back in scrubs. No lights, no applause, just skill and focus. That night, while reviewing case notes, Ava sat next to me and asked, "Do they know you're still here? I mean your family?" I shrugged. "They know where to find me. Whether they want to or not is another story." She didn't press, just said, "I've never said it out loud, but your story. It made me feel seen." I thanked her, not because I needed validation, but because I understood what it meant to feel invisible for too long. Later that week, Maya stopped by my apartment with coffee and updates. "You're trending in the academic subreddit," she said, half laughing. "Apparently someone clipped your speech and posted it as a case study in institutional resilience." I shook my head, amused and slightly horrified. Let's just hope it doesn't end up in someone's motivational slideshow. But Maya was more serious than usual. She pulled out her phone and showed me a screenshot. Daniel's Berlin gallery had officially dropped his installation. Their statement read that the artist had failed to disclose ethical conflicts and that they were reevaluating their curatorial standards. Underneath were hundreds of comments, some defending him, but most pointing out the hypocrisy of profiting off a narrative he never lived. "Karma moves fast these days," Maya muttered, "or maybe just social media." I didn't cheer. I didn't feel victorious. I just felt done. A few days later, my parents tried to reach out again. First an email from my mother with no subject line. Just the words, "We didn't know how much it meant to you." Then a voicemail from my father, flat and factual. "We're leaving town for a while. Florida, maybe. Just wanted you to know." I didn't reply. There was nothing left to say. They had chosen silence when it mattered most. Now they could live in it. That evening, I sat alone in the mentorship office the dean had given me. It wasn't much, just a repurposed classroom with mismatched chairs and old corkboards, but it was mine. I pinned up my acceptance letter beside the program proposal and stared at them both. They represented two versions of me, the one who had hoped others would carry her across the finish line, and the one who learned to walk through fire instead. As I locked up and stepped outside, I noticed a student waiting at the bench by the door. She looked young, nervous, and carried a folder in her lap. I nodded to her, and she stood quickly. "Hi, I heard you help students like me. I'm applying next year, but no one in my family's ever done this. I don't even know where to start." I opened the door again and gestured inside. "Then let's start here." The night air was cool, steady, and quiet in a way that didn't feel empty anymore. I didn't need to look back. Not at the hurt, not at the silence, not at the family that had once watched me crack and thought that meant I had broken. They didn't realize that some people don't shatter when they fall. They sharpen. 2 weeks after the gala, life returned to its quiet rhythm, but everything felt different beneath the surface. I was still the same student showing up at 6 a.m. at rotations, still the same young woman eating dinner from plastic containers and reviewing surgical technique videos in the laundry room between cycles. But now, when people looked at me in class or the hospital corridors, there was a shift, not fame, not sympathy, something closer to recognition. It wasn't about what I had exposed. It was about what I had endured, and more importantly, what I had built after everything collapsed. The mentorship program gained traction faster than anyone expected, within days. Students from different departments asked if they could join, if they could bring their stories, if they could help. I didn't want to be a symbol. I wanted to be useful, so I listened. I took notes. I remembered the loneliness of walking into an office and having no one to vouch for me. I made it my job to be that voice for others, not with noise, but with clarity. On a Tuesday afternoon, while I was reviewing scholarship applications with the university board, Dean Hargrove pulled me aside. He handed me a sealed envelope and said, "From one of the benefactors, No return name. Just a note that said for her. I opened it later that night in my apartment, expecting another card or donation form. Instead, it was a letter, handwritten. The cursive was familiar, slightly rushed. It was from my mother. Not an apology, not exactly, more like an attempt at reflection. She wrote that they had underestimated what this meant to me, that they thought I was strong enough to wait, while Daniel was fragile and needed the push, that maybe they had confused ambition with entitlement, and patience with invisibility. We were blind. She wrote, "You weren't invisible. We just chose not to see." I folded the letter and placed it in a drawer with no lock. I didn't feel hate. I didn't feel warmth either. Just distance and honesty. Maya called that weekend with news. Daniel had posted a long video on his art account, framing it as a reflection on criticism and family. He didn't mention me by name, but it was clear the tone had changed. He spoke of stolen stories and borrowed pain. He admitted, indirectly, that his recent work had been reactive, not transformative, that when the foundation cracked, the show fell with it. He looked tired, not performatively, just worn out in a way that came from realizing there was no one left to blame. Maya asked if I'd watched the whole thing. I said yes. Then she asked if I'd felt anything. I felt like it was the first time he stopped pretending he was the only one with a story. I said, but I didn't feel sorry. You don't have to, she replied. At the hospital, I kept my head down. Cases were piling up, and the hours were long, but the work grounded me. Surgery didn't care about drama. It required presence, precision, discipline, and healing, not in metaphors, not in symbolism, just the tangible kind that stops bleeding and starts breathing. I liked that clarity. One night, I found myself back in the supply closet, organizing donation kits for first-year students. I came across an old stethoscope, one of the cheap training ones we all used in early labs. It still had my name on the tag, faded but legible. I smiled at how far I'd come, not just in skill, but in how I carried myself. No longer needing someone to explain my value, no longer waiting for the kind of love that required me to shrink. Ava dropped by later that week. She brought coffee and a question. How did you know it was the right moment to speak? I looked at her, not as a competitor, not even as a peer, just as someone who had asked the same thing of herself. I didn't. I said, I just knew that silence wasn't protecting me anymore. She nodded and said nothing else. That, too, was a kind of healing. Outside, autumn had settled over the city. The trees near the clinic were starting to drop leaves, and the air smelled like burned wood and cold rain. I walked home slower these days, not out of fatigue, but out of peace. There was no rush, no performance to catch up to, no family expectation to outrun, just a quiet life being built brick by brick, decision by decision. I wasn't chasing closure. I had built my own. The winter months arrived quietly, without celebration or disruption, and I welcomed them like an old friend who didn't ask questions. By then, the mentorship program had grown into something real. Students showed up weekly, not for extra credit or resume padding, but because they were tired of feeling alone. They brought with them stories of rejection letters, unfair evaluations, families who didn't understand why they chose medicine, or worse, families who pretended to support them but never showed up when it mattered. I didn't have all the answers. but I knew what it felt like to study in a silent apartment with a heart full of noise. So I listened. I remembered names. I followed up. I told them the truth when they asked if it ever got easier. It doesn't, but you get stronger, not louder, just clearer. That semester, I was nominated for a regional award in medical leadership. It was unexpected, mostly because I hadn't applied for it. The nomination came from one of the first-year students in my mentorship group. He said he didn't know how to thank me, so he filled out the forms. I didn't tell anyone about it, not even Maya. It didn't feel like something to announce. Some milestones don't need applause. They just need to be witnessed. Even if only by yourself. Daniel reached out again, this time, not by message, but by letter. He mailed it to the hospital, handwritten and longer than I expected. He said he was staying in New York now, trying to rebuild from the fallout in Berlin. He wrote that he was starting to understand what he had taken, not just from me, but from himself. I thought art had to scream, he wrote, but I never noticed how much louder quiet strength can be. He didn't ask for forgiveness. He didn't offer an apology, at least not directly. It wasn't enough, but it was more than I thought he was capable of. I didn't respond, and I didn't tear the letter up either. I folded it, placed it behind the acceptance letter from Oak Ridge, and left it there without judgment. One evening in January, I gave a guest talk for incoming students. The dean had asked me to speak on resilience, a word I used to hate. I told them that resilience isn't about absorbing pain like a sponge. It's about learning when to hold on and when to stop waiting for someone to undo what they did. I didn't talk about my brother or my parents. I didn't need to. The room felt it anyway. One girl stayed behind after the session. She said her parents told her they'd support her only if she chose law school instead of medicine. They say it's more practical, she whispered. I smiled, not with pity, just with recognition. Sometimes the most practical choice is to become exactly who they said you wouldn't. That night, Maya and I went out to dinner for the first time in months. We didn't talk about family or scholarships or art scandals. We talked about books we hadn't finished, about coffee that tasted like burned ambition, about a friend of hers who just got engaged but wasn't sure why. I laughed harder than I had in a long time, not out of relief or revenge, just because life, in its simplest form, had started to feel like mine again before the spring semester began. I was invited to join a surgical team for a community outreach program. It would be small, focused on remote clinics and mobile operating units, low resources, high stakes. I said yes without hesitation. It wasn't glamorous. It wouldn't land me on magazine covers. But it was the kind of work that didn't require a stage to matter. And it felt honest. When I told Dean Hargrove, he smiled and said, "You've always known how to do the quiet things loudly." I didn't correct him. I just thanked him for seeing it before others did. One night before the program launched, I walked past my parents' old house. It was empty now, with a for sale sign leaning slightly to one side, weathered by months of disinterest. Through the window, I could still see the chandelier that had lit so many birthday dinners, graduation cakes, holiday arguments. It no longer held weight, just memory. I didn't stop walking. I didn't take a photo. I didn't even slow down, because I wasn't there to remember. I was just passing through. Some people spend their whole lives trying to be seen by the ones who refuse to look. I used to be one of them. Now, I measure my worth by the work I show up for when no one is watching, and that's more than enough. By the time spring arrived, I had stopped waiting for milestones to feel like redemption. They were just moments now, like any others, and I moved through them with the steadiness of someone who no longer needed applause to believe she was on the right path. I still worked my overnight shifts at the hospital, still rotated through trauma and cardio, still took calls from first-year mentees at awkward hours. Nothing about my daily routine was glamorous, but there was a kind of quiet joy in being where I was meant to be without asking for anyone's validation. One Friday afternoon, the student who nominated me for the Regional Leadership Award stopped by the mentorship room holding a small plaque. He handed it to me without ceremony and said, "They asked if you wanted to attend the ceremony, but I told them you were probably working." I smiled and nodded. You were right. I placed the plaque on the shelf behind me, between a stack of textbooks and a stethoscope someone had left behind. I didn't need to hang it. The point was never to display anything. The point was that I stayed. Maya and I met for dinner that weekend. It had become our tradition to check in every few weeks, not out of obligation, but because friendship, like healing, needed consistent care. She told me her internship was ending soon and that she was applying to a public defender's office. They pay badly, she said, but at least I'll be fighting for something that matters. I raised my glass and said, "To hard work that no one claps for." She added, "But we still show up." It was a simple night, but I remember it more clearly than any celebration that year. A few days later, I received a message from Ramon, my cousin who had hosted the gala table months ago. He asked if I would be open to speaking at a new donor event for his nonprofit focused on equitable access to education. I hesitated before replying, then said yes, not because I wanted to relive what had happened, but because I wanted to make sure the conversation moved forward. He replied with a short line, "We should have asked you sooner. I appreciated the honesty more than the invitation." At the event, I spoke about systems more than stories. I talked about what happens when we treat support as a favor instead of a responsibility. I ended by saying, sometimes the most radical thing you can do is believe in someone before they've proven themselves. That sentence stayed with me more than any reaction in the room. At the hospital, I was asked to help mentor incoming residents. I didn't hesitate. Most of them were nervous, sharp, uncertain, like I had been. I found that I could spot the ones who were trying too hard to seem unfazed. I pulled one of them aside after a shift and said, "You're not supposed to know everything. You're just supposed to keep learning." She exhaled like someone had been holding her breath for her. I recognized that feeling. One morning, while grabbing coffee on my way to the hospital, I ran into my father. It was unplanned, and for a second, neither of us knew who should speak first. He looked older than I remembered, less certain. He asked how I was, and I told him I was fine. He said he had heard about the program, the award, the speech. I nodded politely. Then he added, "Your mother says she still plays it sometimes. The speech. I mean, she says it helps her remember." I didn't know what to say to that, so I said nothing. He looked like he wanted to add more, but instead, he just said, "You turned out stronger than we expected." I looked him in the eye and replied, "That was never a compliment." Then I left. That encounter didn't haunt me. It didn't hurt or echo or spiral. It just confirmed something I already knew. Their expectations had never been my foundation. My decisions were never built to impress them. And what I had now wasn't revenge. It was repair, not of the past, of myself. That night, I returned to my apartment and found the mentorship room's bookshelf fuller than before. Students had started leaving small notes and anonymous letters on the shelves, things they were afraid to say out loud. I read a few before turning off the lights. One simply said, "I didn't quit because you didn't." That was enough for me. The day I received my acceptance into the National Trauma Research Fellowship, I didn't celebrate. I didn't post about it. I didn't call anyone. I just printed the letter, folded it in thirds, and tucked it into the back of my journal behind the photo I had taken the morning after the gala. In that photo, I'm standing in front of the university's main hall, still in my black dress, holding nothing but my notes. My expression is calm, not triumphant, just still. It was the first image I'd ever seen of myself that didn't feel like I was performing for someone else's belief. I wasn't smiling for approval. I wasn't posing to prove I'd made it. I was just present, in a moment that belonged entirely to me. I didn't share the news with my parents. I assumed, eventually. Someone would tell them, Ramon probably, or Maya, or maybe Daniel. I wasn't angry. I just didn't feel the need to circle back. There was nothing left undone. They had heard my truth. The world had heard it too. What came after was no longer about setting the record straight. It was about living without waiting for them to catch up. That spring, Daniel sent another letter. It was shorter this time, simpler. He didn't ask how I was, and he didn't try to explain himself again. He just wrote, I'm working on something new. For once, it's not about anyone else, just me. Thought you'd like that. I didn't respond, not because I was punishing him, but because I didn't need closure from him anymore. That version of us, the one shaped by competition, silence, and second chances, no longer existed, and letting it die quietly felt more honest than trying to keep it alive out of guilt. The mentorship program grew faster than I had expected. Students began suggesting we bring in alumni who'd overcome setbacks, who could speak not from perfection, but from perseverance. One day, a young woman stood in front of the room and said, I thought failing meant I didn't belong here, but it just meant I was human. Everyone stayed silent after she spoke, not because they were unsure, but because they understood. That was the moment I knew the program had become something beyond me. It had become necessary, and it was going to outlive me, the way anything built on truth always does. At the hospital, I was offered a lead rotation spot on an emergency field unit for underserved neighborhoods. I said yes without hesitation. The work was difficult, unpredictable, and at times overwhelming, but it reminded me of why I started all of this in the first place. Not to be the best, not to win, but to show up when no one else would, to walk into rooms filled with chaos and bring order without ego, the kind of work no one claps for, but everyone needs. One evening, as I was finishing charts, Maya sent me a message. Have you seen this? It was a link to a blog post. Daniel's newest exhibit had opened in a small gallery downtown. No shrimp, no mannequins, just a quiet series of pencil sketches, all grayscale, each one focused on a different object, a worn-out backpack, a pair of cracked surgical gloves, a half-burned candle beside a stack of textbooks. The caption beneath the collection read, Things that don't need applause. I closed the link without reading the comments, for once. I didn't need to know what people thought of his work. It was enough to know that maybe, finally, he understood the value of quiet. Weeks passed. Seasons changed again. I received a message from a former student who had graduated and was now mentoring someone else. She wrote, I tell them what you told us, that not all healing is dramatic. Some of it is just choosing not to disappear. I wrote back one sentence. That's all it ever was. There's a power in staying, in doing the work without waiting for an audience, in building something out of what's left after someone else took what was yours. There's a kind of peace in no longer needing the people who once convinced you that your dreams were too much. And there's a quiet triumph in realizing you didn't need revenge to move forward. Just space, just time, just truth. Have you ever rebuilt your life, not to prove them wrong, but simply to remember you were always right to begin with?